of the Africa Student and Youth Summit, tackling the critical issue of how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women and children and why they should be at the centre of the recovery process. Before I introduce our esteemed panellists whose interventions you will hear soon, I'd like to quickly introduce myself and set some context for the discussion we're about to have. I'm Georgia and I lead the activism work with the 100 Million campaign, a youth and student-led movement co-founded by the Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi, who you heard speak in the opening session. We are dedicated to ensuring that every child and young person is free, safe and educated, with a particular focus on the most excluded, the most marginalised children and young people, who, despite all the progress that we've seen in the last 20 years, have been systematically denied their rights time and time again. We are honoured to be partners with Asys and many of the member unions here in this fight for justice, and to have His Royal Highness, as I call him, Peter Kwasi-Koji, your Secretary General, as our trustee. Most recently, we have co-led the Justice for Every Child campaign together, which has shone a light on the unforgivable failure to protect the rights of children living on $2 or less a day during the pandemic. As we've heard time and time again over the last few days, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has not been felt equally. Demographics who were already vulnerable, excluded from justice and denied their basic rights, the vast majority of them being women and children, have been the hardest hit. And their suffering, if action is not taken urgently, is unlikely to end when the virus does. For example, it is now predicted that almost 21 million children may never return to school, that child labour and slavery and trafficking is on the rise, for more people will face acute food insecurity by the end of 2020. And for girls and young women experiencing violence and abuse, the pandemic have allowed perpetrators to continue harming in secrecy, trapped behind closed doors. Now, how has this been allowed to happen? This is not an accident. It is systematic structural injustice upheld by discrimination, prejudice and greed. We live in a fundamentally unequal world. A few small hoard the vast majority of global wealth and influence, and they wield this power to satisfy their own interests, neglecting the needs of the most marginalised who need the most support. So for the topic of this panel, what do we mean when we say that women and children should be at the centre of the COVID-19 recovery process? We mean that it's not just about ending these injustices and that should be the top of our agenda. It's recognising that women and children should be in the leadership of this response. As Peter said in his opening remarks, it cannot be business as usual as we recover from this unprecedented global crisis, and as this summit has discussed, to build back better. Now, as this discussion goes on, you're welcome to join the discussion by sharing your thoughts in the chat box on YouTube and joining us on social media using hashtag ASYS2020 across all. So now, to introduce our distinguished speakers who have been at the forefront of refusing to accept this injustice, this status quo in their different fields of work. We're joined by Dr. Lucy Heady, the CEO of Education Sub-Saharan Africa, based here in the UK and based in the US, by Kate Kimara, the director in Kenya, Amar Lal, a trustee of the 100 Million campaign, an amazing child's rights activist based in India, and Angel Mbathia, the Secretary General for Gender and International Affairs at your very own Asys. Now, I'll introduce them all properly before each of their interventions, and I'm honoured to start with Dr. Lucy Heady, the CEO of ESSA, who previously held the position of Knowledge and Research Director. With almost 15 years of experience in generating and using evidence to improve education, and with ESSA's focus on unlocking the potential of female leaders, her expertise on women's inclusion in the COVID-19 recovery plans is a fitting way to begin this discussion. So Lucy, I would like to ask you, how can different actors within universities and colleges be coming together and prioritising the needs of women and girls during this time? And what practical steps can and should they be? Over to you, Lucy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Georgia, for that introduction. And I want to start by saying what an honour it is to be invited to speak today at the Africa Students' Union Students and Youth Summit. At ESSA, students and young people are at the heart of everything we do, and so it's a real privilege to have the opportunity to speak to so many of you directly. Since the pandemic struck, hundreds of papers have been published globally on COVID-19 across science and social science. An analysis of these papers by the British Medical Journal showed that roughly only a quarter of these papers. This is important for two reasons. The first is it shows how the added pressures on research that is being produced. This will result in gaps in knowledge about what is most important for women and for their families. And so it is a particular pleasure to be asked to speak at this session on putting women and children at the centre of the COVID recovery. Across our work on post-secondary education in Africa, we see the challenges that women face in accessing and benefiting from a university or college education. Small gains that have been made in the last few years are being erased by the pandemic. But before I go into more depth on that, I want to tell you a bit about my organisation, Education Sub-Saharan Africa, or ESSA for short. Our vision is to see high quality education in Sub-Saharan Africa for everyone that enables young people to achieve their ambitions and strengthen society. Our mission starts with universities and colleges using data and evidence to drive a dramatic improvement in education for young people. We believe that universities and colleges have the power to transform Africa's future. They are the places where young people will learn the skills they need to navigate rapidly changing economies. They are the training ground for professionals and are in their own right hubs of knowledge. But if they are to harness this power, radical change is needed. Access must rise from the 10% average we see today. Quality must improve, as must connections to the world of work. We see rising graduate unemployment at the same time as CEOs tell us they can't find young people with the right skills. And yet, when we think about how to transform the system, we're operating in the dark. Data and evidence about the most basic elements are missing. For example, we don't know where young people go after they leave university or college, or how the system is supporting women and marginalised groups. And this is where ESSA comes in. We identify the biggest issues in education driven by the needs of young people, educators and employers. And we join up those with the power and influence from governments in Sub-Saharan Africa to leaders in universities and colleges. And we support them to use evidence to maximise their resources and attract investment. By working together, we turn evidence into action, improving education policies and delivery. We work across issues of access, quality and transition to employment. And across all of these areas, we highlight the particular needs of women. And I'll take the rest of my time to go in depth into a couple of examples. So last year, we worked with the African Association of Universities and the Ghanaian government's National Council of Tertiary Education to lead a study on higher education staff and academics in Ghana. The headline there was that the country will need 5 times the current number of professors that it has to meet its booming student population over the next 5 years. But the need for more female leaders is even more urgent. We found that only 8% of professors at public universities were women across the whole country. In other countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, the situation is similar. In Nigeria, for example, only 17% of principal officers at universities are female. And what about the research produced by these faculty across the continent? African research should be used to improve education at all levels and other issues in society, but research outputs are disproportionately small in comparison to other continents. They're also dispersed across a wide range of outlets and not easy to find. This is something we want to change. We've created an interactive research database in English, French and Swahili with over 4,000 pieces of research on African scholars. Out of 2,500 researchers identified, just 32% of these are female. The top 8 countries by research output Botswana has the highest proportion of female researchers at 43%, followed by Zimbabwe at 40%. Ghana and Ethiopia have the lowest percentage of female researchers, with just 23% and 17% respectively. The COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating this. The Organisation for Women in Science for the Developing World think that women have spent more time on domestic chores than on their research since the beginning of the pandemic. Women must have more leadership opportunities to have a voice in how we reshape and build back better up past COVID-19 and to improve society for us all. And while the situation in academia and education is not unique, it can set the bar. Universities and colleges are places where women can access leadership skills. Best practice for gender policies can be demonstrated, and new research on gender issues can be pioneered. Women in leadership roles within universities and colleges can encourage more women to pursue leadership and counteract gender biases, transforming society so that it works better for everyone. But the financial implications of the pandemic are threatening this mission. According to the World Bank, public higher education systems that are already constrained will have to make trade-offs. And these include laying off faculty and staff, freezing salaries, consolidating programs, and reducing investments in research and student support services to redirect more resources to online or blended learning tools and resources. This is particularly worrying for female staff and students who already on average are paid less, have a lack of representation in leadership and decision-making roles, and have an increased care burden. Our research has found that mentoring schemes and networks for women can be really effective, as can university-wide policies to recognise and support women. But all too often these approaches are simply not implemented or receive no investment. We've spent the last few months engaging female leaders in in-depth interviews about their experiences, and we currently have a survey out to female faculty and students to get their perspective on what more needs to be done to support women into leadership positions. And I'm sure some of you tuning in today have that survey in your inbox, so I urge you, please go home and fill it out today. This research will be published in early 2021, and based on the evidence that we've collected, we're building a coalition of universities, colleges and organisations with expertise in women's leadership. Together, we will co-create solutions based on the evidence we find through our research, including implications on women in education from the pandemic. These solutions will address the barriers women face and inform education policy and, critically, delivery in universities, colleges and beyond. If you would like to get involved or add your perspective, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I hope you found it interesting. And I'll hand back over to Georgia.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And I think that really set the scene for so much of what we're going to be discussing today. I particularly, appreciated your acknowledgement that COVID has really threatened to erode even the small gains that we've made in terms of women's empowerment and leadership. And I really want to pick up on that point about data as well. I think that's really critical. Women and children are consistently, I love the phrase you said about, it means we're kind of like it's, we can't know the solutions until we know the problems. And that's, yeah. And the importance as well, and what you mentioned, and we've got a very regionally and diverse panel here today of really nationalising and localising the data that we get when we work to empower women and children. We can't just assume that a one size fits all. And yeah, echoing your call to all the audience to take part in these surveys, because the more information we have, the better our responses can be across academia, but also in social justice. It's so important. So I don't think Laquessa has joined us yet, so I'm going to swiftly move on to Kate. Kate Kimara is the wonderful director of programs for She's the First, based in Kenya, who fight for a world where every girl chooses her own future, and they work in partnership with local organisations to make sure girls are educated, respected and heard, and a cause that has only increased in importance during COVID-19. And I just want to say I particularly loved one of the messages that She's the First put out about, it's very poignant for our discussion, that you've heard it all before, educate a girl, she'll educate her community. But we want to know, why is it all on her? And this highlights a crucial role of community members in supporting the leadership of girls. We talk a lot about women and girls leading, but actually they need to have the right support in order to be able to do that. So, Kate, I want to ask you, what can communities do to tackle the rise in child marriage and the increased burden of caregiving facing women and girls to ensure they are not denied their fundamental rights to an education specifically? So, Kate, it's my honour to pass the floor over to you now.
Thank you, Georgia. And I really echo the sentiments that Lucy shared before, and I'm really excited and honoured to be here. As you've heard, my name is Kate Kiama. I'm the Director of Programs of She's a First, and I was formerly the Regional Representative for Africa and Europe to the Commonwealth Students Association. And so I feel quite at home, and I want to most sincerely thank the All African Students Union for inviting She's a First to this really critical and important summit. Just for context, She's the First is a global organization that has presence in 21 countries in 6 regions. We fight for a world where every girl chooses her own future. We believe that every girl, no matter where she is born, deserves the right to be educated, respected, and heard. And to this end, we find, fund, and support solutions that not only educate girls and empower girls, but also strengthen the communities where those girls are able to flourish. So based on our work with our partners working with and for girls, I will limit my submissions to these issues, specifically to adolescent girls and women, respectively. As we all know, and we've had, in today's sessions and yesterday as well, and we're very familiar with the fact that education has been particularly hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the African Union International Center for Girls and Women Education in Africa, in April of this year, the school closures on the continent alone translated to 20 million learners out of school at pre-primary level, 160 million at primary level, 56 million at secondary, and 8 million at tertiary level. Across the continent, challenges with irregular electricity, unreliable and unavailable internet connectivity, and poverty further propound the problem of alternative pathways to learning, resulting in many students, particularly girls, having no access to continued learning during the pendency of the pandemic. It is really important to mention that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, a 2016 UNESCO report estimated that 52 million African girls were already out of school. The 76 million women who were sampled in 9 African countries were also found to be illiterate. And the underpinning reasons for this can be attributed to systematic harmful values and norms of patriarchy, harmful traditional practices, religious and social economic pressures, as well as gender-based violence, amongst others. As regards child marriage in particular, Africa is home to 15 of the 20 countries with the highest rates of child marriage in the world. To put this into perspective, every 2 seconds, a girl is married before she is physically or emotionally mature enough to become a mother or a wife. This translates to 15 million child brides globally. Drawing from data from the Ebola outbreak, the Malala Fund in their 2020 report, Girls' Education and COVID, estimates that a further 20 to 23 million more secondary school going age girls from the global south especially will be out of school following the crisis. Over the last 9 months, women's unpaid care work has increased exponentially as a result of school closures and the increased need to care for elderly and sick relatives. Girls have reported being too tired to take on reading after a day of chores, and we have all heard the alarming reports of the increase in teenage pregnancy, sexual and gender-based violence, as well as an increase in FGM, which is a precursor to forced and early marriage in most of our communities. It's really important to note that 60% of women the world over work in the informal sector. And with failing markets, millions of women are at an even greater risk of further falling into poverty. So what can we do to tackle these challenges and ensure girls are not denied their fundamental rights to an education? We offer the following. Firstly, involve girls in recovery processes. Talk to girls. Listen to girls. Program and design and implement with and for girls. Girls are the experts of what they need, and their contributions should not be negated. There will be much higher chances of success rates recorded if practitioners could use a girl-centered approach, for example, when onboarding girls back to school. Girls' voices, concerns, and needs should be included and must be reflected at national and local strategies. Secondly, remove all barriers that will hinder girls from resuming their studies. Policies across the continent to keep girls in school and back to school, even if they fall pregnant, are needed now more than ever to avoid catastrophic fallbacks from the hard-won gains in girls' access to education. The decision by the Economic Community of West African States Court, the ECOWAS Court, that ordered Sierra Leone to establish national-wide programs to help pregnant and nursing girls return to school after the Ebola outbreak should be used as persuasive precedents in all African Union states. Thirdly, governments, funders, and development agencies must continue to prioritize education in addition to health to ensure that there is available funding for the sector once normalcy returns to mitigate some of the eminent challenges that girls are likely to bear the brunt of. Fourthly, leverage the power of grassroots organizing. Grassroots organizations are the most effective in reaching the most vulnerable and underserved girls in any community. In close collaboration with education and health officials, they would be the most instrumental in ascertaining girls' safety in community and supporting efforts to reintegrate all girls back to school, including those who previously may not have been enrolled in school prior to the pandemic. And finally, we must all denounce all forms of gender and sexual-based violence. Perpetrators of violence of gender and sexual abuse must be brought to book expeditiously and judiciously. Girls and women should not be made blameworthy and should most certainly not be discriminated as a result of such atrocities, which are often fathered through unwritten customs, cultures, and practices. We must address the inequalities of the digital divide, remedial classes, and other strategies to bring girls to speed who are unable to learn for the last 9 to 10 months due to technology be prioritized to ensure equity in the classroom and learning curve once normalcy resumes. Thank you once again for inviting us to this important conversation and for your time.
There's so many things in your intervention that I want to draw upon so the audience remembers, particularly the importance you placed on grassroots organising. We know that even with the best policies in the world, unless they are felt and owned by the community themselves, we are still going to see huge levels of marginalisation. And the rallying cry of that I think should be a slogan we should all adopt of talk to girls, listen to girls, programme with girls. I think actually active participation is critical. And a shocking statistic that every 2 seconds a girl enters child marriage. I mean, that should shame all of us. And the last thing I want to talk about as well is important. You mentioned about how even if girls are in school, they report being tired and unable to actually properly engage in education. And I think that's something we as activists need to listen to, because we need to ensure it's sectional, because we don't lead single issue lives. So it's not just about placing a girl in school, it's ensuring that all of her rights around that, her home life, her dignity, her safety, just her well-being is upheld, because that would have a huge impact on her ability to engage in education. So thank you so much for your remarks and the great work you do. And I'm now very honoured to introduce Amar Lau, an incredible child's rights activist, trustee of the 100 Million Campaign and friend of mine. Amar Lau was born into bonded labour in India and rescued by Kailash Satyarthi, lawyer defending children from the worst cases of abuse. He is a testament to the power of education and to the strength of survivors. Amar Lau, what do you think are the biggest issues facing vulnerable children during this pandemic? And what can we learn from previous movements for child rights to ensure the most marginalised aren't left behind during this COVID-19 recovery process? Amalau, I hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Dear friends, panelists, our speakers, youths, people from all around the world who have joined us today. You are the most welcome in this great convention. And thank you so much to inviting me for this event. We know there are many disasters and problems in this world. Today, world is going through the biggest disaster. All of us are facing a lot of problems due to COVID-19. Millions of people have lost their job. Millions of people living without jobs. Economy has fallen down. Health is the biggest issue that everyone has to deal with it. In all these problems, the people who are more affected, they are children and women, as we all know that. Millions of children are out of schools from all around the world. If they are in schools, they are not getting quality education. Due to COVID-19, schools are running online classes. But there are millions of children who cannot access to education because they don't have phones, laptop, computers, or internet. We imagine that children will get at least education in this situation. I'm not talking about quality education now. Governments really need to think a lot about it. We need action now. We can't wait it. Children who are getting online education, they are not safe because of internet crime and cyber crime. How we will ensure that they are safe during the online education, what they are getting during this pandemic? Children are more prone to sexual assault due to living in homes. Research says that 95% children who are victims of sexual assault are sexually assaulted by their own family members. So we can imagine that how critical this situation for the children during this pandemic, during this COVID-19. They are the most marginalized people or the children, and no one wants to talk about them anymore. We say that children are our future. No, if we want to save them, if we want to save the nation, if we want to save the world, we have to understand and we have to listen them now. Governments around the world to understand this, it's very, very important to understand the children's rights and children's voices. Youths raising their voices, who are the most vulnerable children, or maybe the most marginalized people. The strength of youth is so much that they can bring any change in this world. It's very important to force the governments to do their work. It's very important to make them realize their duty, what they really need to do for them. Youths are the campaign for the change. Today, people and youths from all around the world are participating in this program, in this event with us. Your voice is very, very, very important. Your voice is the reason for change in this world, as we know. Your voice is the strength of those millions of children around the world and the most marginalized people.
We know you can do anything, you can change anything. Every action is very, very important from your side. Let's make the world better. Let's do so much. And thank you so much for inviting me for this great event. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Amalau. You always always deliver such a passionate intervention for these issues, and I'm very proud to work alongside you. And I thought the comment you made particularly that was very powerful is that it's often sidelined. It's often people feel uncomfortable talking about it. Whereas if we don't talk about it, and harking back to what Lucy said as she opened this session, if we don't know the information, then we can't work together to end it. And I also think it's your subtle calling out of our governments was an important issue to bring as well, and the way that you phrased it in terms of it's up to us to make sure governments do their work, that they do their duty is critical, because these issues of women and children's abuse and the injustice facing them is often seen as an issue of charity or an issue of kind of doing good, whereas it's not. It's political responsibility that our leaders should be enacting, and I'm sure that all of us here today will continue to hold them to account to deliver their duty as you have so explicitly mandated us to do. So thank you very much, Amalau. And I now have the privilege to introduce our final speaker, the Gender and International Affairs Secretary of ASU, a very true boss madame in in the entire meaning of that phrase, but probably not known to many of you here. Angel is a fighter for justice on every level. She is an amazing leader within Kenya and across the continent, and relentless in her pursuit, and with so much experience of defending the rights of women and children especially. So Angel, I hand over to you in this session, talking about how student union members, both as individuals and representative institutions, how can we push for the participation and the leadership of women and girls in COVID-19 response plans?
Right, yeah, thank you so much for that tremendous introduction. Well, it's such a wonderful event to have young people still connecting amidst this pandemic, and that's quite encouraging. And even for us to give limelight to women and children, which is something we are really encouraging and asking decision makers, civil rights movement emphasis on as an aspect of our society that really needs support and monitoring, so that we don't lose the so much time and the so much effort we have put in to just bring up these two aspects of our lives. And it is no doubt, again, that women are a beacon of hope to our societies. And more often than not, they have shown resilience in all facets of life, from giving life to nurturing children, providing for the family, and ensuring that everything they touch funds resources that they get. So women play a very significant role in the building of our economies and the sustainability of our nations. So small and medium enterprises are the main engines of job creation throughout Africa. And an estimated over 90% of all farms outside of the agricultural sector are comprised of women. And so women's formal ownership of SMEs stands at around 1/3 of all registered SMEs in Africa. And women in politics have gone further in showcasing their prowess by earning themselves places at the decision-making table with their great skills of listening, high emotional intelligence, energy, and ruthless focus. So over the years, women's efforts have been underplayed and their roles go unrecognized. It is now that we are in the 21st century working to close these gaps. And COVID-19 has not been kind to the efforts that we have been making. But however, women have been central, even though still the farthest behind, have come out to play their role in the fight against COVID-19. Women have come out as frontline workers. They are still manning community centers, and they are leading in the making of masks to increase their availability in our grassroots communities. So our children, again, joy to our lives with their expectant, non-discriminatory minds and with hearts full of joy. So children represent creativity, energy, and innovation, and should be the heartbeat of our society, especially in times of crisis like this. So it is important that we consistently invest in women and children, since they form the bedrock of our societal leaders. So student, youth leaders, governments and institutions should come together to cut the chains that hold down women and children from attaining their full potential. So as the All Africa Students Union, we are emphasizing on community engagement, grassroots mobilization to bring together community leaders in educating and sensitizing on COVID-19 measures. And then the other thing is that we are encouraging students to support movements in the medical field that are asking for higher pays from their government institutions. Those that are asking for PPEs, proper PPEs, we are asking students to advocate for them as well, to louder their voices so that we have much more needed support in the health sector that is quite dire at the moment. We are also asking the student community to use their research skills in getting into the deep exploration of this novel coronavirus that we have little or no experience in dealing with in this time. Students to contribute to the agenda setting, contribute to the problem solving aspects that are needed into making this pandemic quite easier so that we come out of this braver and stronger. And then the other thing is that the All Africa Student Union rolled out the Girls Back to School campaign in partnership with UNESCO and the 100 million campaign to bring back our girls from school, because we are seeing that our children are being affected in education. And I'd like to echo this as some of, as Amar just talked about, dropping out of school of children, and the increase in teenage pregnancies, as Kate talked about. And school is a place for social protection, and we are losing that. But now we are asking students' unions from across Africa to use their network in their universities, in their institutions, to help bring back our girls back to school, because we need a generation that will foresee that we get to where we want to be as a continent, and not just for Africa, but across the world. And then what we see coming out in leadership and what threatens digital learning and leadership is the civil rights movement, the activization, the comradeship that builds and grows over time when we are physically in school is now under threat, because students coming together are more difficult now than ever before. And then again, we are banking on young people to be the front runners of leadership and become current and future leaders. And schools are our leadership hubs. That's where we get all these leadership skills calculated right at our primary levels, at our secondary levels. So we lose not just learning and mentorship, but that bedrock that has been quite the hub to generate more leaders into our society is being threatened. So we need to still encourage more leadership courses to get trained for student leaders, and for the All Africa Students Union and other partners from Kate, from the 100 million campaign in our schools and universities, so that we don't lose out this very important aspect that we have consistently been growing, and people like me who are beneficiaries of the same. Thank you very much for bringing this up, because it is quite important that we showcase our great strength and knowledge and our determination in braving this pandemic together, stronger and faster. Thank you, Georgia. Over to you.
That was a perfect way to kind of start rounding up today's discussion. Just again, I hope everyone who's watching this now has been taking notes or will watch it again later, because there are some key slogans that I think are a real call to action for all of us, particularly Angel's one about cutting the chains. I think that's really critical, and also recognising that something that maybe we haven't all touched on as much as we should, but actually that, you know, women and children are already playing leadership roles, right? You mentioned this in terms of the COVID-19 response plans. Women and children are often on the front lines, they are the first to respond, and yet this leadership isn't being acknowledged. So it's not just about building leadership, it's about recognising leadership that already exists. A failure to do so is just proving, again, the systemic injustice that ignores women and children's contribution to society. And, you know, I think it's really fitting that you mentioned how COVID has also taken away some opportunities for us to collectively meet and to organise and to build friendships that are critical to sustaining movements for change. I know that it's a fitting thing to end on here as the Africa Students and Youth Summit. I've been lucky enough to attend the two. Nothing can replace that meeting people personally and building that connection. And as much as we try our best online and virtually, it's something that I think we're all looking forward to restarting. And I know that we've been given a little bit of extra time as we started a bit later, and I wanted to ask the speakers for their final statements, and just if they can share in a few sentences to anyone here watching on what they can do to support the rights of women and children in their community or in their country during COVID. So, like, what is the first step that they can take today to stand in solidarity with our exploited sisters and brothers? So I know it's throwing this one at you, a curveball at you all, but I'm sure that you all have some suggestions on how people can be part of this change. So who would like to go first? Lucy has taken herself off mute. Thank you.
I'm happy. I'm happy to go first. Give people a bit more thinking time, and use that excuse to be brief. So the thing that really came across for me, listening to the other really excellent contributions from the panelists, is this is a crisis. We were in crisis before the pandemic. The pandemic has exacerbated afterwards. So as this short period of pandemic crisis recedes, let's not lose that sense of urgency that we've gained during the pandemic. Let's stay focused on the crisis. And, you know, what can we all do? I think we can listen to what women need. Let's not assume that we know. Let's listen to them. Let's understand what works. Let's not assume we know the answers. Be ambitious. We've been changing the game for years, and yes, we've had a setback through the pandemic, but we know change can happen. So let's instill that in ourselves and everyone around us, that the change is there, and it gives me so much confidence to hear everyone on the panel today that I know that change.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And I see women volunteering to the front lines yet again on this panel. So Kate, over to you for your final statement.
I'm reminded by Desmond Tutu's wise words when he once said that if you're neutral in a situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And so for anyone who's tuning in and who's listening and who's wondering, I don't have all the resources, I don't have all the skills, do that small thing, because if each of us can do a small thing, then we can be able to create ripple effects. So volunteer your time if you can to a women's rights organization or child rights organization. Donate if you can, either monetary or in kind. I think that's a long way to go. But if you see injustices, I think it's really important for us to shield ourselves under very many layers. But I think it's really important for us to truly call it out. And then finally, I think it's really important for us to build voice and agencies for others. For echoing what Lucy said, it's really important to actively listen and not listening with, I already know what you're going to say. It's actively listening to what girls and women are saying, even as we try and build their voice and agency. And once they've gotten there, for us to be comfortable to take a step back, because that's what I think the epitome of leadership is.
Thank you very much, Kate. Amalau, I see you going to switch off your mute button, so over to you for your last statements.
Yeah, I really feel, and I think for the people, that this is the time for the people to follow the compassion inside them. You have to realize and you have to feel the others' problems as you are, and you have to think in that way. So I think that's the most important things.